podcast has not been sanctioned.
The battleground was Monday nights.
80
For a campaign of 83 consecutive weeks,
3
there was a clear winner in this historic war.
weeks.
This is the story of that campaign.
83 weeks.
20 years later, the time has come for the whole truth. This is 83 Weeks with
Eric Bischoff and Conrad Thompson.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm outstanding. I've had a really, really great week so far. I couldn't ask for a better week.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because of you guys, man. We debuted at number 1 on iTunes in the sports and recreation category, and number 2 overall, beating Joe Rogan, Oprah, and a lot of stuff. One of the strongest wrestling debuts maybe in the history of podcasting. Bravo, Mr. Bischoff. Bravo.
Well, you've got a great team. I'm happy to be a part of it. And I'm not just saying that to blow smoke. You really do have a great team of people, and that's what it takes. And by the way, I'm hoping we see a shirt pretty soon that says Oprah Killer on it.
I like it. I guess we should shout everybody out. Of course, our man Steve Kaufman is helping us over on YouTube. You can keep up with us on YouTube at 83weeks.com. The man behind all the magical graphics is, of course, Mr. Dave Silva. Dave Hancock helping us with some social media action. We had Justin Vigil and Matt Kuhn help us with the music. We've got a tremendous support team here. Can't thank them enough. And of course, the victory lap video, the hype video that circulated social media this week was created by the incredible Chris McDonald. A whole host of folks help make this show happen, and we appreciate your support. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. Tell your friends. And don't forget to check us out on Twitch. We're doing something extra here for you guys that not a lot of other podcasts have adopted, but I bet they do. Go to twitch.tv/83weeks, and I think you'll find there some pretty fun stuff, including extra content from Eric Bischoff that really supports what we're doing here on this show. Of course, last week's episode was all about the creation of the NWO. And Eric couldn't wait to jump on twitch.tv/83weeks and take your questions. And he sort of breaks down everything that we covered and then allows you to sort of pick his brain. I get to beat him up here on the show, but you can beat him up over on twitch.tv/83weeks. But we're going to do something extra special for you this week. If you haven't already, go hit the button. You're going to be glad you did. It's twitch.tv/83weeks. We're going to watch the Fingerpoke of Doom episode with you. And you'll be able to sort of live stream it on the WWE network on your television, press mute, and then watch us on a split screen on Twitch. And I'm going to beat up Eric, and you can beat up Eric. It ought to be a great time. And I believe the gimmick here with Twitch is if you have Amazon Prime, it's a pretty sweet deal, right?
Yeah, it's in fact, it's a free deal, which is the sweetest deal you can get, right? You get one channel free if you have Amazon Prime, but even if you don't, you don't have to subscribe. You can go log on, look for /83 weeks, and just follow us and get a taste of it. But I think you're going to want to subscribe, definitely going to want to follow us because we're going to do some fun stuff. By the way, Conrad, is anybody going to beat your ass while we do this?
Well, I'm sure there will be lots of people who aren't really a fan of mine who would like to take shots. And if you'd like to scream your insults at us, you can. It's twitch.tv/83weeks. I don't know that a lot of podcasts are on with this, but man, we are. We want to be the most interactive show of all. You can follow us on Twitter. If you haven't already, please do. That's where you'll get your updates instantly. It's at 83 weeks. Of course, we're over on Facebook, facebook.com/83 weeks. But really and truly, most of these updates are going to be coming on Twitter and on Twitch. So if you haven't already, please go find us on Twitch. We've got lots of fun stuff planned for you later this year. As Eric's going to be out and about doing some live events, and whenever I'm doing some live stuff, we're going to go live on there and let you guys sort of have a peek behind the curtain, if you will, for twitch.tv/83 weeks. I want to thank everybody for their overwhelming support last week. It was the buzz of the internet. It's not possible without you guys. It's just really not. And there's rumor and innuendo, as I like to say, and Bruce likes to say, that we're not the only ones who are back and better than ever. Isn't that right?
I was waiting for the song to play. Really? The theme song. No, I hear there's somebody else who's back and better than ever. Tell me about it.
Well, you're exactly right, Eric, because the foul-mouthed, boozed-up bruisers of the graphic novel series To Be the Man are back, and they're kicking evil's ass in and out of the ring. If you didn't hear Bruce talk about To Be the Man on the Morning Deuce, To Be the Man, Evil Ain't Good is a hilarious, action-packed, and gorgeously illustrated new comic about two hooch-fueled pro wrestlers. If you're a fan of the F-bombs and decapitated demons and 80s pro wrestling, this is for you. You're going to love this thing. Chapters 1 and 2 of To Be the Man are available now on Amazon and at tobethemancomic.com. So to go ahead and follow them on social media, it's easy. Look for at To Be the Man Comic, and you'll get your copy of To Be the Man, Evil Ain't Good today, brother. It's on Amazon and tobethemancomic.com. And we're proud to have them as a sponsor here on the show. We appreciate you following us, but we would really appreciate if you would check out at To Be the Man Comic on social media or tobethemancomic.com. So I'm ready to kick your ass. Are you ready to take your licks today, Mr. Bischoff?
I am so ready. Come on, bring it.
Let's talk about it, man. I got to watch this show for the first time since it happened, and it's such an interesting show. If you haven't already, you should probably check it out with the commentary before you watch with us on Twitch later this week. Of course, it goes down on the January 4th, 1999 edition of Nitro. There's just so much meat on the bone. And I want to apologize in advance because I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this. And when they see this topic, they probably think we're covering Starrcade 98. But we're not. We're going to save those for some other time because this would be a 6-hour long show. But I do want to lay a little bit of the groundwork for how the hell we got here. 1998 was such a much bigger year for WCW than 97. And that's even hard for me to swallow because 97 was my favorite year as a wrestling fan. But WCW 98 just saw tremendous increases across the board. Attendance was up 46.7%. Television ratings were up 56%. Pay-per-view buy rates were up 17.7%. They're selling out house shows at a clip of 48.8% compared to just 40.5% the prior year. And your average house show gross is $166,190 compared to only $87,000 the prior year. So that's like over 90% of an increase. And critically, I would think that a lot of people would say, Eric, WCW had their best storylines in 96 or 97, but 98 was just a sensational year for business. Why do you think business was up so much? What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think really, the uptrend in business doesn't necessarily relate, immediately to what you're doing on television. It takes a while to build. It takes a while to kind of build that awareness and get people excited, and you really start realizing the benefits of what you did 2 years ago this year. It just takes a while to build. Just because you do something great on TV on Monday night doesn't mean the following Monday, all of a sudden, house show business is going to go up, 20, 30, 40%. You've got to be consistent. You've got to do it over a period of time. And I think what you're pointing out is, by 96, 97, we started cranking out some good stuff, and it really starts building its own momentum into 97 and 98.
Well, you guys did a lot of stuff in 98 that I think a lot of people have sort of glossed over in hindsight. I know I do, because you did so much, it sort of just all runs together. But that's when you did the stuff with Leno, with Rodman, with Malone. Of course, Goldberg became a megastar. But Meltzer and everybody else sort of criticized the product and saying that you guys didn't create any other new stars and the product had started to, I don't know, maybe turn stale. Is that a fair assessment in hindsight?
In 2020 hindsight, I can understand why somebody would take that position, but there were a lot of things going on in 1998, and while the numbers were really good, as you pointed out, there were a lot of things happening behind the scenes that began to take its toll on the property. From a creative perspective, we were starting to get handcuffs put on us. We were jumping through hoops at the corporate level that we had never had to jump through before, meaning with standards and practices and mandates from corporate in terms of what we could do and what we couldn't do. So we were constantly trying to find new ways to do the things that we did in 97 or even in 96 that we really couldn't do anymore from a creative perspective because we were becoming more sanitized. Corporate wanted us to be more PG. And it started out as being a kind of a pain in the ass, quite honestly. And it really started out in August of 98 is when it really became, it started earlier than that, but in August of 98, it got so bad that I almost quit the company. I really did. And it got progressively worse so that, by January of 1999, we were in a really, creatively, I was really frustrated. And so was everybody else.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, and I had this later in the format, but I feel like I should just get to it right now. I want to read this excerpt from the Death of WCW book. But the sins of 1998 began to take their toll in 1999. Even worse, 1999 was the year that WCW made some of their most horrendous decisions, yet decisions that instead of turning things around as hoped, actually sped up the company's decline. Consider this, just 2 years earlier, WCW was the number one wrestling company in the entire world. In the 365 days of this year, they managed to lose no less than $15 million, more money than any promotion had ever lost in the history of the business. In a way, it was shockingly similar to the Jim Crockett promotions in the way they had booked themselves into oblivion nearly 10 years earlier. They hired a booker, Dusty Rhodes, in the mid-80s, Kevin Nash in 1998, who put himself and his friends over at the expense of all the other talent. They booked screw job after screw job, run in after run in, show after show, until it drew the infamous wrong kind of heat, the kind that drives fans away. They put all the old, stale talent on top and pushed them hard, despite the fact that the ratings made it clear that the fans wanted new blood. And all that exciting young international talent that Bischoff had scoured the globe for in 1996 had become so far booked into oblivion that they were pretty much unsalvageable. At least with JCP, the wrestlers worked hard and did their best even as the ship sank. But in WCW, things were so bad by mid-year that virtually everyone, from talent to even office personnel, had mentally given up. Is that accurate? It sounds accurate based on what you just said.
No, it's not accurate. And first of all, you said a lot, you covered a lot of ground there. So for me to say, yes, that's accurate or no, it's not is a broad statement. Let's pick it apart just a little bit.
Sure.
Who wrote that book? I think that idiot's name was Alex Marvez. Is that right?
I think it's R.D. Reynolds and Brian Alvarez. I could be wrong.
Brian Alvarez. First of all, neither one of those clowns ever had any conversations with anybody within Turner Broadcasting or WCW that had any knowledge of the financial situation. They wrote a book based on second, third, fourth-hand information or something else that they read off the internet. So I don't know where they got that number of $15 million. And I'm not even going to say it's accurate or not accurate because I don't have the balance sheets from 1998 at my fingertips. But I do know for a fact that neither one of those clowns ever had a conversation with me or anybody else that was anywhere near the nucleus of the operational side of Turner Broadcasting. That I know for sure. As a matter of fact, just a side note, that is the only book that I refuse to sign. If somebody comes to me with that, no, I'm not kidding you, because there is so much horse shit between the covers of that book that I refuse to give it I refuse to sign it to give it any sort of credibility. So it just happened in New Orleans at the WrestleCon. Somebody came up to me and they were all excited. Said, "Oh, would you sign this?" I said, "Absolutely not. I won't sign it." So if you're out there and you have one of those books, clearly it's worth nothing. I won't sign it. Don't bring it.
Hey, let me ask you this. I'm glad you brought this up because I was meaning to pitch you this off air, but fuck it. Let's roll. So I've got an idea for Starrcast. And if you're out of the loop, I don't know where you've been, but you should go to starrcast.com because there's a rumor that there's a big podcast convention coming to Chicago over Labor Day weekend. It's in conjunction with the All In show that the Young Bucks and Cody are putting on at the Sears Center. And I figure, hey, if it's wrestling podcasting, then we got to be there. And my idea was, let's try to set something up with Alvarez and you and Nash and a few other people who were on the inside of WCW. And let's create like a death of WCW panel. You got the cojones for that, Eric? Or are you gonna dick tuck?
I'm not afraid of doing it with anybody. I'll debate anybody. My only concern are there are certain people that I just don't want to lend any credibility to. I've learned after being in this business, there are certain people who conduct themselves in certain ways that I just refuse to associate with. So by being on a panel with somebody like an Alvarez who puts out that shit and calls it factual and positions himself as knowledgeable about something he knew nothing about and had no real sources other than second and third hand information, it's really hard for me to do it, but I'll do it. You know, if you want to do it, I'll do it.
Yeah. I love this. I hope that happens.
If nothing else, I'll just rip him a new one and leave him just laying there in a puddle.
Man, see, this is what we need, right? This is the type of stuff we need. If you haven't already, go check out Starrcast.com. I'm going to make this happen. I don't even really know Brian Alvarez, but I'm going to hit him up. I got to see this. So let's continue. Here's what I'm curious about, though. I love the parallel that they brought up, and I know you hate everything about this book, but the parallel between this with Dusty sort of running Jim Crockett and Nash sort of booking WCW. I mean, they're 10 years apart. You know, the old famous Dusty finish, and now we've got the finger poke of doom. It just seems so fucking perfect. And you don't see how there may be parallel? No,
no, absolutely not. Look, whatever his name is, Brian Alvarez and that other douchebag, they wrote a book. You know, they had perfect 20/20 hindsight supported by a bunch of fictional nonsense that a bunch of second and third hand, people fed them. And it's really easy to write a book and sound like you know what the hell you're talking about when you do that. I could write a book about, the Atlanta Falcons and the New England Patriots a couple Super Bowls ago and make myself sound like I could probably be a head coach somewhere after the fact. It's really easy to do that kind of thing. And that's what pisses me off with guys like that. Let me set it straight because we have the time to do that here. What was going on in WCW at that time, and we're going back to probably early 98, not exactly clear, but when the Time Warner Time Warner Turner merger started to manifest, meaning it started becoming a reality. We all knew it was coming. We all read about it in the paper. We all knew about it. And it didn't really affect business at all. We were still operating as we always had. But by about August of 98, I keep going back to that point because I remember that moment so clearly because it was a very decisive moment for me. I got called into a meeting, and I've talked about this in my book. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. But WCW was still rocking. I mean, things, as you just pointed out, from a revenue point of view, things were going great. We had established our budget, or we're pretty close to getting it finalized and approved for 1999. Because we usually did that. We started working on the budget usually in the spring, had to have it kind of turned in and approved by the middle of the summer, and then by fall it was finalized, and that was our operating budget for the following year. So right about in the middle of that summer period, I was just about getting ready to go on vacation for a few days, and I got called into a meeting over at Techwood. Now, Techwood in the Turner broadcasting culture back at that time, at least, Ted's office was at CNN, WCW, all the major operating, units were all in CNN. But a lot of the core executives and offices were still over at the original TBS facility, which was called Techwood, over by UGA. I think it was UGA. I got called to a meeting that I knew nothing about. Nobody had given me a heads up, almost spontaneous. And they said, hey, did you mind come over coming over to TechWeb because there's some people here, we'd like to talk about WCW. And this, again, was a part of the manifestation of the Time Warner Turner merger, if you will. Actually, it was an acquisition. It wasn't really a merger. And I said, sure, no problem. I had hair halfway down to my shoulders. I was wearing cowboy boots and jeans, and I think I rode my Harley to work that day. So I wasn't really, didn't have my corporate outfit on. But I jumped on my bike and I headed over to TechWeb. And I got, I walked into there was a big conference room, and there's like 15, 16 people that half of whom I had never met before. I didn't even know who they were. Very corporate, and which was not really the culture at Turner. Turner up at that point, it was a very entrepreneurial, kind of laid back, relaxed culture. You had your suits, you had your finance guys, would always have their suits on, and, the lawyers and all that. But for the most part, when it came to the operational side of all of Turner, it was fairly relaxed and entrepreneurial. Probably much like a tech, business would be today. So I walked into this room, and all I saw were dark blue suits, white shirts, red ties, and brown wingtip shoes. I thought, geez, somebody should have given me a heads up. I would have bought a uniform, And I sat down, and everybody went around the table, and they introduced themselves. And in what seemed like just a matter of minutes, after everybody told me who they were, I'm listening to all these people go around the table to tell me how I should start running WCW. And I was disoriented at first because I thought, well, are you people kidding me? Where have you been for the last 2 or 3 years? In fact, where were you 6 or 7 years ago when this shithole was leaking sewage all over Atlanta? And now that we're making money hand over fist and we've got ratings that are through the roof and we're getting written about in the Wall Street Journal, a bunch of people I've never laid eyes on before are now going to tell me how to run my business. And that's the point where I knew I was in the shit. That's the point where I knew this merger was going to have a bigger impact on me personally, but also WCW than I ever anticipated. And that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. The budget that, we had been working on got slashed, got hacked, even though we had thunder dumped on our lap. We were, mandated by Ted Turner to expand the business. There was a lot of pressure on us to grow the unit. And then all of a sudden they're gutting our budget. They're telling me how to operate the business. And all of this didn't happen, by the way, in August of '98. But that's when it started. And then it got progressively worse. Now, the truth in Alvarez's book, and I think I'll call bullshit when I hear it, but I'm also going to point out facts when I hear them too. The truth is, office staff was demoralized. Yours truly probably more so than anybody. And it ripples down. It does. Talent was frustrated. They couldn't understand why we went from, reinventing the industry and going from the sewer, to the big house in what felt like, overnight. And then all of a sudden we're not able to do a lot of the things that we used to do to get us there. It was a very frustrating time indeed. So I think that portion of Alvarez's book is correct. And I would support that. But the losing the $15 million, that's a far more complicated financial picture than that idiot would be able to reflect accurately in a book.
I love that you just went around the block twice to call him an idiot. That was great stuff. Is it fair to say?
But is that not good information?
No,
is that
great
not insight that you didn't know before?
I mean, I'd heard you say the story before, but I did my homework on you. I appreciate you sharing it with our listening audience. Absolutely. But I love your attitude towards the navy blue suits and the brown wingtip shoes and the red power tie. I mean, you paint a very vivid picture of what it was, and here's your hippie ass. So, it was never going to work. The line here that he finishes the paragraph with, in WCW, things were so bad by mid-year that virtually everyone from talent to office personnel had mentally given up. So you just told us sort of the insight into you sort of being, I don't know, fucking burnt. Is it fair to say that the talent was as well? Is it the undercard talent who feels like they've been held down? Is it the top talent who feels like, you know, we've hit the fucking iceberg. I mean, how are the boys feeling at this point, if you had to gauge?
I think overall, from 100 feet looking down, I think everybody was frustrated, and it does roll downhill. I was frustrated. We were all frustrated. The office was feeling it. Everybody was fatigued. We were producing 2, primetime shows, live shows during the week. We didn't have additional resources to do it. Everybody was burning out. I think that part of it is true. But nobody gave up. That's bullshit. That's some creative liberty that douchebag decided to take. That's not true. We all worked twice as hard as we worked the year before, but it was very frustrating, especially when we started to slide, especially when we started to lose ground. As far as the boys, look, as long as they got their paychecks, they were happy. For the most part, they were all going to bitch and moan anyway. If we would have been on top of the mountain, we would have been continuing to have the success that we had in '97 or even late '96. They'd still be pissing and moaning because they would want more money, or they would want more spotlight, or they wanted to be in the main event. Was the talent any happier or less happy? Yeah, probably less happy, because again, the general feeling was stressed out, frustrated, disappointed, and fatigued.
Let's run through the ratings in December. Of course, the Monday Night Wars are pretty close here. We know that WCW dominated for 83 weeks, the name of the show here, but that tide had sort of turned a little bit by the end of 98. So let's run through December 98's rating. The 7th saw Raw do a 5.15, Nitro does a 4.2. The next week, on the 14th, Raw's up to a 5.2. Nitro is still a 4.2. On December 21st, Raw's way down to 4.7, but Nitro just does a 4. Now, December 28th, the night after Starrcade, Raw does a 4.9 and Nitro does a 4.6. And it is sort of telling here that the WWF is winning the ratings war for both the go-home edition of Nitro for Starrcade and the night after Starrcade. I mean, are you guys really starting to panic here? You can feel it slipping away here, can you not?
Yeah, panic wouldn't be fair or accurate, but definitely concerned and definitely aware. And I think what would be helpful here, and I didn't have time to do it. I knew we were going to be talking about this, and I just, really started getting my head into this a couple hours ago. But I think what would be a really interesting look, and maybe we'll do this on twitch.tv/83 weeks, but it would be really interesting to see creatively what was going on in the WWE at that time, because that's really what the whole story will tell you. As we are becoming more creatively restricted, the WWE is, pouring it on. They're going way over the top with some of their content. Now, I'm not sure about the timeline. I can't tell you right here on this podcast, but I'm guessing that what was going on, at least in my head, based on what we're talking about here, is the WWE has finally, they got rid of their goofy shit. They got rid of their garbage men and their dentists and their leprechauns and their cartoony bullshit. And they started doing more and more and more of what we were doing in terms of the adult kind of 18 to 34-year-old content, reality-based content. And they not only did what we were doing, but they started doing it better than us because they were able to go farther than us. So while they're putting their foot on the gas and using, nitrous oxide, we're, having to pump the brakes and use lighter fluid from a creative perspective. And I think that's what was really frustrating me and what concerned me the most. The cleaner we got, the more sanitized we became, the less likely it would be that core audience that we had built at that point would choose us over the WWE when they were putting, like I said, they were putting, pedal to the metal.
Yeah, and they really were. I mean, they set company records in 98, but you guys did too. WCW grossed $49.6 million off of its 12 pay-per-view events in 98. The WWF did approximately $54.7 million. Both of these are records for each company. And even though the WWF does more, I'm curious, when you're bringing in that kind of cash, when WCW never really has before, does the attitude from the Turner execs change towards wrestling? I mean, it sounds like they almost wanted to control it more based on what you talked about earlier. Are you getting any sort of credit here? Or is it really just, okay, now that, thanks for getting us here, Eric, but now that it's a thing, we're going to put our hands on the wheel?
No, and this is where, and it's really hard for me. I know I've talked about this before, and I know you've done your research and you know a lot about this stuff. But again, context is king. And well, people ask me sometimes, what was the highlight of your time in WCW? It's really hard for me to say because there were many of them, and it's hard just to pick one because they all affected me in different ways. And it's hard to quantify those feelings, especially, 20 or 25 years later. But there's one moment in time that I think really meant the most to me and still does to this day. And it's when the head of finance at Turner Broadcasting, not WCW. I'm not talking about Bill Bush, Don Knotts. I'm talking about a guy by the name of Harry Anderson, who was the chief financial officer and on the Turner Broadcasting Board of Directors and Executive Committee, who oversaw all the finances for all of the Turner entities. And I was in a meeting with him, I guess in 90, I'll get the year wrong, so I'm not even going to say it. Whatever the first year was that we turned a profit, the summer before that, because that's when we were setting our budgets, I was in a meeting with him and Bill Shaw, who was at that point the executive vice president of WCW, or president, I guess. And in that meeting, we were going through the budget, and I predicted that we would turn a profit for the very first time since Ted Turner had bought the entity. We were going to turn a profit. And Harry looked at me and laughed. And he wasn't disrespectful, but he couldn't believe that I had the audacity to suggest this entity, which had never turned a profit under anybody else's management, was going to turn a profit, especially under me. He didn't have any confidence in me. But he, like I said, he wasn't disrespectful. I was. I said, well, Harry, I didn't call him Mr. Anderson. I said, Harry, I'll tell, and I did this right in front of Bill Shaw, who was really my boss. I said, I'll bet you $1 that I do. That first dollar of profit, I'm going to deliver it to you next year when we close the books. And he laughed. And I said, when I do, you're going to come to the Christmas party that we're going to have before the end of the year. And you're going to get down on your knees and you're going to hand me that first dollar of profit. And you're going to apologize for not having confidence in my team. And he laughed, and it was a bet. It was an informal bet. And he was a very good-natured guy. He didn't take offense. None of that. Fast forward, we were well into profit before. By the beginning of the third quarter that year, everybody knew we were going to make money. And sure enough, we had a company Christmas party, a little Mexican restaurant, not too far from Center Stage, where we used to do the old WCW Saturday night shows. And all of the directors and as many employees as could come were there. And Harry Anderson got down on one knee and handed us that first dollar of profit. That, to me, was the highlight of my career. And from that point all the way up until the time that we're talking about right now, things were awesome. We were getting that kind of corporate high five. Executives were proud to associate themselves with WCW. And again, putting this in context, when I first got to WCW, nobody in that entire CNN center wanted anything to do with WCW. It was an embarrassment. They wouldn't even talk about it. Nobody wanted to be associated with it. If we were to go across the CNN center and ask CNN to cover a piece of news for WCW, they would laugh us out of the building. That was the tone and tenor. We were like the redheaded stepchild that nobody wanted at the picnic. And that was everybody except for Ted. Ted was the only one. And because it was Ted, people had to toe the line and go along. But from that time, when Harry Anderson handed me that first dollar of profit to the period of time that we're talking about in August of 98, there were executives I'd never even heard of before that were calling WCW offices asking for tickets so they could take their kids to Nitro, or showing up at a pay-per-view, or a couple of times, asking if we could send a wrestler to go out and play golf with some executives or salespeople. That kind of shit never happened prior to that. But it changed dramatically about August, September of 1998, when executives who had no affinity for WCW whatsoever, didn't even really want it in the Time Warner portfolio, that's when we started really feeling the squeeze.
Let's circle back to the end of December here in 98. When you see, this go home edition of Nitro lose to Raw, and then the night after Starrcade loses to Raw. I mean, are you feeling the pressure here? Like, man, we got to come up with something to fix this and fast.
It's hard to say what was going through my mind. I know my nature, and it's funny. Today I was reading through the websites, and I'm not going to mention the news site, but I was looking at one of them, and it's SmackDown ratings down again was the headline, and I looked at it, and ratings this week compared to last week were down about 100,000 viewers, which by the way is a rounding error of a rounding error. Nielsen is not that fucking accurate. Okay, it's a guess at best. And I looked at that and I just shook my head, and I do what I always do when I see those kind of clickbait headlines, is I look back to what was SmackDown, year to date, previous year. And SmackDown was up 100,000 compared to what it was year to date. And that's how networks look at things, by the way. They don't look at things week to week. And to answer your question, neither do I, especially over the holidays. Holidays is a jump ball. I mean, people are going, you got holiday parties, people are shopping, people are traveling. So the weeks leading up to answer your question, the weeks leading up to Starrcade and even after the pay-per-view, sure, I was aware, I was disappointed, no question about it. But to me, in the month of, from Thanksgiving to really the middle of January, I don't give two shits what the ratings say, because they're going to be all over the map.
Wow. I apologized for cutting out Starrcade, thinking if I leave it in, it's going to be a 6-hour show. But since we're getting a goddamn dissertation with every answer, buckle up, boys and girls.
You want detail, brother. That's what I heard about you.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not mad at it.
I'll give you the fluff.
I like to bust balls. It's what I do. It's sort of my deal. Let's talk about Starrcade 98. We're in the main event. We saw the undefeated WCW World Heavyweight Champion Goldberg defend the title against Kevin Nash. And of course, Nash earned the title shot by winning the 6-man 3-ring battle royal at World War III the prior month in November. And I know we're going to discuss both of those shows later in much greater detail, but a lot of people jump to conclusions here and say that the reason all this happened is because Kevin Nash booked himself to win the 3-man battle royal and then to be the guy to beat Goldberg at Starrcade. I'm curious. I need you to sort of clarify it for us. Was Kevin Nash the booker when all of this happened? I mean, he's never come out and said, yes, I was the booker, but it's certainly what everybody else says.
I think it's mostly true. I never gave him a raise and said, okay, you're the booker now. I never completely threw up my hands and said, okay, I'm just going to let you run with it. You can do whatever you want. That never happened. But I did, I will say this, Kevin and I, we had issues, man. There were times when he wanted to kill me and vice versa. He would have been able to, I wouldn't have. But, there were times when, we were both just so fed up with each other and frustrated with each other. And it got ugly, any number of times. But when things started really getting tense for me and I needed somebody whose judgment I could trust creatively, Kevin was there. He didn't come to me and say, hey, do you mind? Can I kind of get more involved with booking? Can I have a little bit more voice in the room when it came to creative? I came to him and I said, look, brother, I need some help. I'm fighting, we've got a battlefront going on over here with television ratings and creative, and we've got to make sure that thing is just as tight and as great as it can be. But I've got another battle going on over here behind me that you guys never see, that I have to fight every single day. And that, again, being, the office and all of the changes that were being forced down our throat as a result of the merger. So I needed help. And it wasn't just because I was tired and I was frustrated and I was fatigued. I know that's a narrative. What was happening is I went from fighting a battle on one front, which was television and television ratings and pay-per-views, to having to fight two different battles. one on the creative side and one on the business side. And I needed help, and Kevin was there. And I trusted Kevin's judgment, even if we didn't get along, and even if we battled over shit and he pouted and, threatened and whatever it is, that happened during that period of time. At the end of the day, we came together, and there were so many good ideas that he had that I looked around in the room and I said, okay, who can I trust to really help me here? And Kevin was the guy.
So let me ask you a different way here. Why was Kevin Nash chosen to face Goldberg? Does he sit around one of these booking meetings and say, as Bruce Pritchard likes to reference, what if? How does this first come up, and how is it met with everyone else in the room?
I can't speak for everybody else in the room, and I don't think anybody overreacted. And you got to understand the mindset of the people that worked in creative at that time. And we talked about them, last week, and they were probably the same people at that time. Look, I was surrounded by a bunch of yes men.
Right.
Some of them were friends. Some of them still are friends. But it doesn't change the fact that nobody really challenged me too much. In fact, nobody really challenged me at all creatively. Everybody kind of just got along to go along, make sure they got their check in the mail. Talent would challenge me. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about the guys, writing the shows on a Tuesday that are going to, air the following Monday. Or Wednesday, I should say, to air the following Monday. Those guys, that team, the creative team, they didn't really challenge me much. They throw out ideas, don't get me wrong. It's not like they sat there like freaking turnips and didn't do anything. But if I had an idea or there was something that I wanted to do, there weren't too many people that would say, oh, man, that's the dumbest idea I ever heard. When the idea of Kevin, and I don't know whose idea it was. It's impossible for me to tell you. Other than a few creative beats that I know for a fact were mine, which I'll take credit for if I need to. But for the most part, 98% of the ideas that you ended up seeing on TV were the result of a collaboration of a bunch of people, including the talent when it came time to do it in the ring. So it's really hard to pinpoint who raised their hand and said, hey, why don't we have Kevin do it? I'm sure it came up. It might have been Kevin. It was probably somebody else. I don't think Kevin was hesitant. Kevin saw what happened when Ric Flair was the booker and Ric Flair was booking himself. Now, it made sense for Rick. He was Ric frickin' Flair, but he was also the booker, and he got a lot of heat for it. It's a bad position to be in. Kevin Sullivan, same thing. Bad position to be in when you're a booker. Even if you write something that's great and it's for you, you got guys around you looking at you going, well, why didn't you write something that great for me? That's a tough spot. So I doubt it was Kevin's idea, but when I heard it, I went with it. And if you think about it, step back, forget about all the Dave Meltzer bullshit and Brian Alvarez bullshit and all the 2020 hindsight that people live off of, and just look at it. You got Bill Goldberg, who we have built as a monster, who has mowed through everybody. Who's he going to be that would be credible? Kevin was the biggest guy on the roster, for crying out loud. He was 7 foot. He was 350 pounds. He looked awesome. If anybody on our roster was going to present a believable challenge to Bill Goldberg, who else? I ask you, Conrad, who else, if you were booking, who else would it have been?
How about not beating him yet?
We'd run through everybody there was to run through. How do you keep that character alive? I mean, how do you keep that streak alive? There's nobody else left. He's got to beat somebody or get beat by somebody. He's got to be a character. There's got to be a story. You've got to put that babyface at a disadvantage in order to create a story where he's coming back up the ladder again, because that's what people want to see. They want to see the babyface chase the championship. They don't want to see the babyface hold the championship indefinitely, unless you're a Hulk Hogan.
Eric, I need to take another quick time out here to tell everybody about hidefromrent.com. In case you've been under a rock this last week, we need to tell you about the great success we had with hidefromrent.com. Just last week, we helped more than a dozen 83 Weeks listeners go ahead and find out how easy it is to finally own a home of their very own. Now, I've got this question for you if you're a renter. After all those payments, what do you have to show for it? Isn't it time you got something for your family with First Family? No, I'm not talking about Jimmy Hart's stable in Memphis. I'm talking about First Family Mortgage, and I can help make it happen for you. We can get you the backyard you need to play catch with your son, or Maybe even go ahead and give you a yard for a dog. Maybe it's time for a big enough kitchen to where your wife can host Thanksgiving at your house. Or maybe those Rugrats need a chimney for Santa Claus. Whatever you don't like about the lease life, maybe you've got a noisy upstairs neighbor at your apartment, we can get you into a brand new house with no money down. You heard me right. No money down. Come on. And your monthly payment, it's about what you've been paying in your rent, sometimes even cheaper. But maybe best of all, you don't need perfect credit to do this. Even with credit scores in the 500s, we can still help you get into a brand new house, and we can make it happen right now at hidefromrent.com. Stop throwing your money away. You don't know any like super successful, wealthy renters. You need to make a good investment, especially with the way real estate is now in 2018. You're going to have a home to claim for your own and one heck of an asset. Go to hidefromrent.com. We'll show you how fast and easy it is right now at hidefromrent.com. NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. And don't forget, when you go to hidefromrent.com, you're dealing with me, Conrad Thompson, at First Family Mortgage. Yeah, I mean, business was so down. That's what we were recapping. Let's talk about beating Goldberg another time. Kevin Sullivan wrote this, though. He was on the booking committee at that time, was he not?
Yes.
He wrote, "It was like the Titanic hitting the iceberg. I can tell you the exact night it died. Goldberg getting beat by Kevin Nash. Goldberg, his matches, they looked semi-real. We drew $1 million house on free TV, 43,000 people there. I went to Eric and said, please do not beat him. And he said, people are going to get sick of him winning and they're going to turn against him. I said, we've got $1 million out there. And they showed that tape over and over again. We had the golden goose and we strangled it. Of course, hindsight's 2020, but a lot of people buy into what Kevin Sullivan's saying here. Your response?"
He's trying to put himself over. That's what wrestlers do, especially aged ones that don't really have anything else going on. Look, I've done it myself. I'm not knocking just Kevin Sullivan, but guys like Kevin Sullivan and so many others, they've told this story so many times that they start believing their own bullshit. Kevin Sullivan never came to me and begged me not to do it or asked me not to do it. Kevin's full of shit. This is just Kevin writing things and saying things to make himself sound smarter and more knowledgeable and astute than he really was. Kevin Sullivan was happy to get a paycheck. Kevin Sullivan was half messed up 3/4 of the time when he showed up to TV.
God damn.
I mean, come on. Dungeon of frickin' Doom, for crying out loud. That's Kevin Sullivan.
It took 44 minutes, but you're fucking kicking ass now. Meltzer reported, in the biggest wrestling deal made in this country in recent years, Eric Bischoff put together a deal with NBC to begin airing 2-hour primetime wrestling telecasts beginning on February 14th with a live show from the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas and a second show that will be broadcast live head to head with the WWF's WrestleMania on March 28th. Now, Dave would lay out that you essentially negotiated this deal over a 2-week period and wound up landing spots head to head with WWF pay-per-views on NBC. So that's going to be the February St. Valentine's Day pay-per-view. And of course, the next month against WrestleMania, there's going to be 6 shows on NBC. The first one on Valentine's Day was going to be called Love Hurts. And Dave speculates in The Observer that securing this deal likely meant that you would speed up the return of both Hogan and Savage to WCW, who were still huge stars in the mainstream. And there's even rumors that there's going to be crossover appearances from other shows on NBC, like Friends, where they would actually appear on these primetime specials. Of course, none of this actually winds up happening because it was essentially the backup plan for NBC if this NBA lockout happened, but it wound up not happening. What can you tell?
Not true.
Okay. What can you tell us about this deal?
We had the deal. We had discussed a 6-event package. If indeed portion of it is true, I apologize for cutting you off. A portion of that is true, meaning we had talked about what's plan A if this lockout continues. Excuse me, what's plan B if the lockout continues? But plan A was we were going to do that Valentine's Day show. I mean, that they had to fill the schedule. And if the lockout would have ended they wouldn't have started back up again until after Valentine's Day. So they committed to have us do a show on Valentine's Day. And then we were going to kind of take a wait and see attitude or position subsequent to that. What happened, and this would have happened even if the lockout would have continued, is Turner Broadcasting killed the deal.
What?
Time Warner killed the deal. I had the deal the NBC called me. I had become very friendly with a gentleman by the name of Gary Considine. Gary Considine was the executive producer for the Jay Leno show, and that's how that all kind of, evolved and came around. He was a good friend, and we got to know each other really well. And whenever I would go to Los Angeles, I'd go over to visit Gary because we had a lot of other things in common, and got to know a lot of the other executives there. So when the NBA lockout happened, I got a phone call from Gary, who was working with the sports people, and said, "Hey, what do you think about doing this?" And that was going to be that live Love Hurts, or whatever we were going to call it, event. I said, "Sure, we could do that." I started putting together a couple different ideas. One of them was to have Dennis Rodman and Carmen Electra get divorced on because everybody else does weddings, wrestling weddings.
Right.
I wanted to do a wrestling divorce.
That's
Carmen
fun.
was in for it. Dennis was up for it. NBC loved the hell out of it. And we started working on a little bit of the creative. I pitched the idea to Turner because by this time, I had to get permission. Had it been a year earlier, they would have found out when they watched it on TV. I wouldn't have had to ask permission to do it. I could have done it. But now, under the new corporate regime, I had to run it up the corporate flagpole. And the brain trust above me decided, now that's a bad idea to have a Turner Time Warner property on another network. So we don't want you to do that. That's an example of what made me freaking crazy.
Well, let's get back to your favorite book, which sooner or later we're selling autographed copies of. It's The Death of WCW. And he would write, seemingly rejuvenated by the news of the deal, Bischoff came up with a master plan to, quote, restore WCW to its former glory. He would revolutionize wrestling just like he'd done in 1996 by, yep, you guessed it, doing everything he'd done in 1996 all over again. The scene was the Georgia Dome in Atlanta, home of the now legendary Hogan versus Goldberg bout. The date was January 4th, 1999. And as Bischoff had hoped, WCW truly revolutionized the wrestling business on this date. Unfortunately, it wasn't a positive revolution, but a new example of just how quickly a formerly successful wrestling promotion could fail. In hindsight, this show was probably the single most destructive Nitro in the history of the company. Yes, other shows were far worse, but this was the one, more than any other, that started the ball rolling towards the company's inevitable doom. It's a cliche, but this program was a disaster of epic proportions. Now we're going to address the actual Fingerpoke shortly enough, but let's briefly touch on this. This book, which you've already said is bullshit, basically insinuates that the decision to make this angle came after you booked the NBC gig. True or false? When did you guys first come up with this Fingerpoke horse shit?
I can't tell you. I can make some shit up. I can tell you that, but I'm not going to do that. I can tell you that obviously the NBC thing was kind of spontaneous. I mean, it happened as a result of the lockout and the strike. So it's not like we had 6 months to prepare for that.
Right.
Those conversations didn't evolve, in the fall. They happened very, very quickly. So I would suggest to you that the two weren't really connected. I'm almost 99% sure that is the case. They're just not connected. They may have looked that way to geniuses like Brian Alvarez with his 20/20 hindsight. It makes him sound smart, but the truth is, I would bet everything I own that they weren't really connected.
Let me ask you this. Did the Fingerpoke idea, had it already been laid out by the time Kevin Nash beat Goldberg at Starrcade?
No.
Okay. All right. See, that's going to be fun. We're going to get into that in just a minute. Let's sort of take a right turn for a minute. Around this same time, it comes out that WCW sued Titan for over $3 million for going out of their way to stop High Road Productions in Canada from releasing its documentary, and in doing so, kept Turner Broadcasting and WCW from attempting to acquire the rights to the movie. Now, allegedly, this was even covered in the Hollywood Reporter, and it was saying that Turner was trying to buy the rights and release it as a pay-per-view movie, and then eventually release it as a primetime special on either TBS or TNT. Now, I'm mentioning all of this to you because the movie we're talking about is, of course, Wrestling with Shadows, the Bret Hart documentary. What do you remember about this situation, Eric? I'd never heard about you guys suing WWE for interfering with the release of the movie and your plans to push it out. What can you tell us about Wrestling with Shadows and suing the WWE over it?
Nothing. I mean, if there was a lawsuit on behalf of Turner Broadcasting, I had nothing to do with that. And I'll be, again, I hate doing this because I know people hate hearing this, but so much of this, the way you're positioning this question is allegedly and assuming and as reported by, honestly, I don't know how true it is. I don't know how accurate it is. I don't think anybody's trying to lie here or mislead, but I just don't have the facts to be able to respond honestly or accurately.
Meltzer would write about the situation, quote, "There was nothing legally preventing WCW from hyping the movie on its own, but that was a decision made by Eric Bischoff to not have the announcers or anyone on television acknowledge the movie either before or after because he felt the portrayal of McMahon in the movie was too close to the television character, and therefore he felt the movie would actually help the WWF." Wait a
minute. I don't even understand the question, bro. So, bro, did I just say bro?
You did. I can't believe you did that.
I'm going to hold on 1 second. That was me pounding my head on the corner of the table. I don't even, I just don't understand the question. So I decided, I'm going to rephrase this the way I thought I heard it. So Meltzer is suggesting that it was my decision not to hype the movie before or after because the character in the movie, the Vince McMahon character, was too much like who? Like Vince or like me?
Like Vince McMahon. The idea being, if you promote it because it does sort of shine a shitty light on the WWF, that it might actually help because Vince McMahon, the character, Mr. McMahon, is over like Rover here as a super heel. And that movie sort of reinforces that he's a heel. And maybe you thought better of that. You're saying bullshit.
I'm saying none of this makes any sense to me.
Okay. Let's move along.
WCW, there's no way WCW initiated any lawsuits against anybody, really. We would have, if we had to sue somebody, when Ric Flair and I got into our pissing contest over his contract, I'm giving you an example. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's important that people understand how WCW operated. If there was an issue that I had with talent, like I had with Ric Flair at one point, we've covered it before. WCW didn't sue him, Turner Broadcasting did. And once Turner Broadcasting initiated a lawsuit or began defending a lawsuit, if it was the other way around, I had nothing to do with that. Now, if there was an issue with that particular production, and if I had a reason, but it would have had to have been a really good reason. I would have had to have just cause. Turner Broadcasting just didn't file lawsuits because of my ego or for marketing reasons. There would have had to have been damages involved. We would have had to have cause in order to file a lawsuit. So that's why none of it really makes any sense to me. And I would love to know more about that lawsuit. I'd love to see some documentation and see what the justification for a lawsuit would have been. But without that, I can't really comment on it. I'd be guessing.
Well, let me get you to comment on some things I don't think you can justify. The December 28th Nitro from Baltimore, one night after Starrcade, where Goldberg, who was undefeated, lost the world title in his first match. And it's a sold out show. Here we are. We're opening Nitro with a shot of you in the back of the limo, celebrating with the NWO, talking about your win over Ric Flair at Starrcade. Not about, I don't know, Goldberg fucking finally losing. How can you defend this silly shit?
Story, anticipation, reality, surprise, and action. If you go back and look at a lot of our shows, we didn't open with the hottest thing on the night. We wanted the audience to anticipate that. We saved that. We built for that. You're not going to put your hottest stuff right up front. There were a lot of times when we would open up a show with a match that really didn't matter, and then we would do the hot open of the show, and then we would come back to the announce table to really set the show up, because that's how we hooked the audience. And by the way, it had been working pretty well up to that point. I wasn't the most important thing. I wasn't trying to put myself over. I was an important part of the story, as was Ric Flair, as we will see, or as we would have seen going forward past that point when Ric Flair took over the company and all of this stuff started, that story started really unfolding. But the fact, I know it's easy for people to go, oh, why would you put yourself in the front of the show? Because I wasn't the most important thing. And we wanted to build anticipation for the story to hook people to stay with the show and see what was going to happen later on.
We're going to talk about this Ric Flair stuff another time because there's so much to talk about here, but let's briefly touch on this Nitro after Starrcade. Nash comes out and tries to do...
Got to give me a date.
December 28th.
Okay.
Nash comes out and tries to do a babyface interview, but the fans aren't going with that. He's challenging Goldberg to a rematch on next week's Nitro and says he didn't want to win the title the way he did. So let me just hit pause here for a minute. When you have the decision to beat Goldberg at Starrcade, obviously you have a plan of where you're going, but maybe you don't know about the Fingerpoke yet. Was the decision made prior to Starrcade? Okay, we're going to beat Goldberg here. We're going to set up the rematch the following night for a week later. So 8 days after Starrcade is when the rematch is going to happen. Is that already sort of laid out before the finish comes at Starrcade?
Yeah, we had a pretty good idea. But look, we knew what we had to do. We knew we wanted to bring the Wolfpack, the Red NWO, and the Hollywood NWO, or NWO Hollywood. We had to bring them back together again. We were really positioning at that point to do our best to turn over Nitro to NWO and to turn over Thunder to WCW, headed up by Ric Flair. That was the arc that we were trying to achieve, and bringing everybody together the way that we did on the January 4th show was a part of that process. So yeah, we knew before December 28th, we knew that Kevin was going to win. We knew that Kevin was going to try to con the audience and swerve everybody to sucker Bill into that match. And we knew what Kevin was going to do with Hogan so that we could get the belt back into NWO Hollywood and bring NWO back together again.
So you didn't know prior to beating Goldberg that you were going to do the Fingerpoke, but you knew essentially we're going to do something to get the belt back on Hogan at that point.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was a finger poke or what the execution of the swerve would have been, but the story we had pretty much figured out. We knew what the beats were, not the details.
This is worth mentioning here. I'm sure we're going to talk about it at another time, and I'm not going to get into much detail because we're going to save it for an Eddie Guerrero show. But this same weekend is when Eddie Guerrero suffers a horrible accident. It's on New Year's Eve, just a handful of days prior to this show. And Eddie Guerrero is in a bunch of pre-taped skits here with the LWO on this edition of Nitro. What can you tell us about this wreck? How, when, here, what did you hear?
Well, obviously, I heard from Janie Angle, my assistant. She was really, she kept me in the loop probably more than anybody. And she had more access to me than anybody did. Janie was the one that told me. She got the word first and got it to me right away. I didn't have a lot of details when I first heard it. I was real concerned about it, but I heard shortly, I don't know if it was a couple hours later, I heard that he was live. He was going to be okay. his prognosis for being able to come back was good. So it didn't stand out in my mind as a very dramatic moment. It was for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, but I got word shortly thereafter that he was going to be okay.
Let's get to the show. As we mentioned before, January 4th, 1999, we're in the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. They're going to draw 34,788 paid folks here, a total of 38,809 in the building. The building was actually set up for 46,000. The gate is an incredible $735. So, close to $1 million here. I'm sure with merchandise, it was well over. The prior trip to the Georgia Dome was July 6, 1998. They had over 41,000 fans there, a $906,000 house. Of course, that's when Goldberg first became the world champion, beating Hulk Hogan. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that match another time, but I've always been curious, why was the Georgia Dome always a Nitro and never a pay-per-view? I ask because the rumor is you really liked strutting that ass for all the Turner execs and sort of bringing them in, since it was a local show, to sort of show off, look at what you've built and look at what's on your channel.
That's so fucked up. It's such childish bullshit. It's not true. Why was it never a pay-per-view? I don't know. Schedule wise, probably had more to do with it than anything. The pay-per-views were relatively tightly scheduled. There was only so much pay-per-view real estate available, and the WWE and WCW were competing for those prime dates. And if the Georgia Dome wasn't available on that date, it's not like we could say, fuck the playoffs. I know you guys, I know the NBA playoffs are going here and the Hawks are playing, but you know what? Go play somewhere else because we want to do a pay-per-view here because that'll make Dave Meltzer happy. It's so stupid. We scheduled the buildings according to availability and according to a schedule that was laid out a year in advance. If it coincided with a pay-per-view, great, we'd do it. There was no reason we wouldn't want to do that. We'd get just as much enthusiasm for a pay-per-view in the Georgia Dome as we would for a Nitro. It's such a
well, I mean, you say you would, but you don't know because you never fucking did it.
It's profound bullshit. That's what that is.
Well, there's lots of bullshit going around on this show. The show opens with footage that really sets up Kevin Nash and the Goldberg rematch. And then Tony Schiavone, Larry Zbyszko, and Mike Tenay introduce the program as balloons start to fall to celebrate the beginning of Ric Flair's reign as WCW president. And they tell us that Hulk Hogan is going to be here. Well, Hollywood Hogan, and he's going to address the crowd regarding his retirement and make his first appearance since announcing that retirement on the Tonight Show in November. And he's also going to announce who his running mate is for the presidency. Let's touch on this silly shit here. The fake retirement angle, the presidency angle. Please defend this. God.
I can't. Uncle.
Yeah, I'm not mad at it. I mean, listen, sometimes it's okay to just say, fuck, that sucked. I can't help that. Flair and his family come into the ring with the Horsemen. The WCW office employees are here to cheer for him. He addresses you and then says, you now work for Tony Schiavone. What a rib that is. And then he hires back Randy Anderson for double the salary and then sets up a tag match with Rick and David Flair taking on Kurt and Barry at Sold Out. I'm sure we're going to talk about this at some point in the future, but how the fuck did David Flair wind up in this spot?
Look, David wanted to follow. It'd probably be good for you to talk to David, but David was in a power plant. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. Rick wanted it as well. It wasn't me. I didn't force it down anybody's throat. They came to me with that idea. I didn't judge whether or not, David Flair was ready or not. I like David. The fact that he was Rick's son had a lot of, storyline potential from my point of view. Keep in mind that when it came to in-ring stuff, I never tried to be the final say. I relied on people that had a lot more experience than I did. Rick being one of them, Arn being another, Kevin Sullivan, Terry Taylor. There are a lot of people whose opinions I valued a lot more than my own when it came to judgments regarding who's ready, who's not ready in the ring. And when they came to me with the David Flair idea, and I'm sure somebody was blowing smoke up Rick's ass at that point and probably talked Rick into it, I looked at it from a storyline point of view. I didn't look at it from a ring-ready point of view, if that answers your question.
Sure.
I proved it. It's on me. Nobody forced me to do it. I chose to do it, but that's why I chose to do it.
You also approved having Chris Benoit beat Horace Hogan in about 4 minutes here with the crippler crossface. Eric, I've always been curious and wanted to ask, what's your favorite Horace Hogan match?
That one. You ain't getting me, brother. I got your prosecuting attorney shit down.
Hey, let me ask you this. How much weed did Horace have to carry for Hogan?
I don't know. You have to ask Horace.
Here's the silliest of the silly shit. Here we go. The police surround Goldberg here on this show and say, you're under arrest. He, of course, protests and says it's going to take all of their guns to take him down. And then he says something like this to Officer Jack that he says he's known for years. Whatever it is, whoever charged me with whatever it is, everybody in this city knows I do nothing but positive things in this community. I do things for the kids and fallen cops, and nobody can take me in for anything I didn't do. Whatever it is, I'm innocent. None of you guys can take me downtown for something I didn't do. I don't like being wrongly accused. I stand for good in this community, and no one else can tell me otherwise. Eric, you had to watch this week. How fucking painful was this to watch in 2018?
Really bad.
Oh God, it's awful.
It was, I always, and I say this to this day, if I was producing a wrestling show tomorrow, I would go at it from the point of view is less is always more. Leave a little to the imagination, show a lot of emotion, but don't talk too much unless you're really, really good at it. And as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, who in the hell produced this? And why did they just shut that down? No, I do nothing but good in this town. I save people from fires. I work for fallen soldiers. I walk old ladies across the street. I mean, the only thing he didn't do was heart transplants in that scene. It's just, it was horrible. It was just horrible. I felt bad.
It's awful. I mean, you've got to go watch this. It's the most wrestle crap thing ever. After the commercial, they show Goldberg being taken away in a squad car. And Nash walks out yelling, "What's going on? I have a match with him later." And Hollywood Hogan laughs at Nash and says he is a law and order politician now, brother. And he believes in the guilty doing their time. And as Hogan enters the arena, Elizabeth is standing nearby talking to what looks like a couple of detectives. I assume this was all shot live that night.
Yeah.
Let's get to the incredible Monday Night Jericho version of Chris Jericho. He has an 8-minute match with Saturn. Eventually it goes to a DQ, but it's kind of fun because I kind of forgot about this Monday Night Jericho with Ralphus and how much I enjoyed him. Good stuff here amongst all the bad here. Next after that, we see some cameras from WCW that were apparently allowed into the fucking police station where Goldberg has been informed here, and this is all on TV, which is just great. Suspension of disbelief, Roll Tide, that Elizabeth has filed charges against him for quote unquote aggravated stalking. And of course, Goldberg denies the accusation, not even recognizing her name at first. But back at the arena, Liz is telling the detectives that Goldberg has been following her everywhere, from the buildings, the arenas, the hotels, even the gyms. And she says she feels threatened by him. Eric, I want you to sort of set the record straight because it's been said for years now. The original idea for this angle was to have Liz accuse Goldberg of rape, but Bill shut that down. True or false?
False.
Wow. That's amazing to me that this was the original idea. I would have really rather you said, yeah, we wanted to accuse him of rape, but he got so offended. He went with, I help fallen cops. I help old ladies cross the street. I'm innocent. I'm a do-gooder. Don't you see my cape? But instead you're saying, no, he just fucking freestyled all that silly shit over stalking.
No, he didn't freestyle. But look, we'll go back. And when we watch this on Twitch TV, we'll analyze that scene a little bit. Look, I agree with you. That scene when the cops had him surrounded and they first told him that he had to go down to the police station and they had to arrest him. That was a fucking horrible scene. It was just poorly executed, poorly produced, poorly acted. The cops weren't actors. They were real cops. Jack really was a friend of Bill Goldberg's. That's how we could get all those cops who literally had loaded weapons on their hips. These weren't like fake, gimmick cops from the costume Halloween store. These were real cops, and they were friends of Bill's. That's why we're able to do it. But they weren't good actors. That's what happens when you don't use good actors. But no excuse. The scene sucked. Whoever produced it, whoever walked him through it should have been shot. I think a lot of it was probably Bill's nervousness. Bill at that time was super sensitive to his perception in the community. So I think a lot of that insecurity of, people in Atlanta seeing him being arrested probably made him a little nervous. And I think that's why he overcompensated as much as he did. That's my take, knowing Bill. I didn't produce the scene, so I can't tell you for sure.
It's worth mentioning, this came out in a court, all the court records when you guys were sued years later, the actual payroll figures that everybody got. And I've always been fascinated by this because Goldberg was selling some fucking hella merch in 1998. And in 1998, he made $16,278, which is actually less than we're making right now over at ericbischoff.com. Go check out these shirts, man. They are hot. Not only the 83 week shirt, which I think is actually one of the best sellers, but my favorite design, and I think it's yours too, Eric, is the Fired shirt. It looks just like the old FedEx logo. No brag, just facts. Easy does it. Old school Easy E, NWA rapper style. But we've got two brand new ones. And one of these is one of Eric's very favorite sayings. I thought last week it was quite frankly, but second is certainly context is king. You can pick that shirt up right now. And this was even a fan submission here. This is probably going to be the most popular one now. 83 for life. I don't remember what fan suggested it to you, but when you sent it to me, I said, "Oh, we're stealing that."
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I love that one. I love the look of it on his shirt. It's one of those shirts you can wear, like a lot of ours will be, that if you're a wrestling fan, you listen to this show, or you wear it around other wrestling fans, wink, wink, nod, nod, we get it, kind of like a little secret code. But you can also wear it out, trying to get laid, TGI Fridays, and you won't look like a wrestling geek.
Wait, I love that you just threw that in there. Did you used to pull a lot of ass at the TGI Fridays? Was that your go-to?
No, but I had a lot of friends that did.
In my head, there's you over there. Hey girl, what you know about them fried green beans? Give me them numbers. I mean, what? Fucking TGI Fridays. I love it. These are the type of conversations you can have with Eric Bischoff. Pick up a shirt right now at ericbischoff.com. And when you do, Eric's going to call and personally thank you. So pick up my favorite, Fired. Maybe pick up Eric's new favorite, 83 for life, but they're all right there at ericbischoff.com. So let's get back to the money here for Goldberg. I'm just fascinated by this. 16,000 and change in merch in 98, 32,000 and change in licensing, 462 was his salary, a total of 511. So let me run through that. The year he wins the world title, becomes a fucking superstar, $511,148. His 1999 total, $5,191,132. Fucking 10 times the money. And so I say all that to say, as much as I wanted to make fun of Goldberg for all this do-gooder bullshit he did in that promo, for $5 million, I'd be super fucking protective too.
When I hired Bill Goldberg, I think I hired him at $125,000 when we first picked him up. He got bumps along the way, but when his contract expired and he got that big contract, he also got Hulk Hogan's attorney, a gentleman by the name of Henry Holmes. Now, Henry Holmes was Hulk Hogan's attorney. Henry Holmes didn't represent any, I think he may have represented Randy Savage. And that was because Hulk wanted to help Randy out. So other than Randy and Hulk, at that point when you're giving away Bill Goldberg's merchandise and contract amounts, Bill didn't have Henry Holmes. But when the time was up, when Bill knew he was going to negotiate a big contract, and Hulk knew that Bill was going to get a big contract, Hulk went to Bill because they were close. They were pretty good friends. Hulk, Bill looked up to Hulk and kind of leaned on him for advice because Bill was very green and he needed somebody to kind of smarten him up, if you will. So he leaned on Hulk a lot, and Hulk kind of took him under his wing and introduced him to Henry Holmes. So now, and I don't know how Barry Bloom factored into that. I'm not sure who brought Barry Bloom into the equation. But all of a sudden, I got this guy who's making about $500,000 a year. He's our world champion. Things are going great. I wake up one morning and find out that he's represented by Henry Holmes, who, by the way, also represented guys like George Foreman and other really big, Chris Everett, and some pretty big names. Barbara Streisand at one point. The Baywatch chick, whoever she was, I can't remember her name when she was hot. Henry was a pretty high-power attorney, and I had dealt with him with Hulk, and he was miserable. So when I woke up one day and found out that Bill Goldberg is now being represented by both Barry Bloom and Henry Holmes, I knew that shit was going to get bad for me really, really quick. It got brutal. We were at that point now, I think wherever it was in 1998 when his contract came up, and now Bill is playing hardball. He went from, golly gee, Eric, it's so good. I'm so glad to be here. Kind of like the guy that, helped old ladies across the streets when he was talking to the cops. He was so easy to get along with, so grateful for the opportunity. And now all of a sudden he's Attila the fucking Hun. It was brutal. And we came close a couple different times. I'm going to tell you one really quick story because it was funny as hell. I knew Henry because I had to go through a couple battles with Henry when it came to Hulk's contract. I didn't have to fight too hard for Randy or with Randy, but with Hulk's deals, it was always a grind. And I developed this kind of love-hate relationship with Henry. We respected each other, but when it came to fight, I was clearly outgunned, to be honest about it. So now we're fighting back and forth. We're pissing all over each other, just going back and forth for a period of a couple of weeks, maybe even a month and a half or 2 months. So finally, everybody agrees we're going to have a sit down. Henry Holmes and I are going to meet somewhere in Beverly Hills, and we're going to try to come to an agreement on Bill Goldberg's contract. He was incredibly important to Turner Broadcasting at that point and WCW. Obviously, in the position we were in, we could not afford to lose a guy that we'd spent so much time building. And from a storyline point of view, he had me over the barrel. There's no question about that. And everybody knew. Harvey Schiller knew. Everybody knew we were going to pay dearly because we hadn't seen it coming. We didn't do a great job, seeing this freight train coming as a character, and we didn't plan ahead. So we knew it. Long story short, I get to Los Angeles, and Henry wanted to meet one place. I wanted to meet another place. So I said, "Look, Henry, I'm represented by CAA. CAA is one of the biggest talent agencies in the world." I said, "Why don't I meet you there? Neutral ground. I don't want to meet in a restaurant. I certainly don't want to meet in a bar. Let's all meet at CAA. You and Barry and whoever else you're going to bring. I'll be there. I'll have an attorney or two there, and we'll just hash this out." So I get to CAA early, and I tell my agent, I said, "Look," because I know Henry Holmes at this point. The first thing Henry's going to do when he walks into the room, and I told everybody in the room, so the first thing Henry's going to do is he's going to tell you the George Foreman grill story and how much money he made selling the George Foreman grill, because he brags about that to anybody that will listen to him. So that's the first thing he'll do. And then I told my agent, I said, "Look, I want you to find every intern in CAA that's not doing something really important. When Henry Holmes walks in this room, I want him to see a table on my side of the table lined up with what looks like 25 or 30 agents. I want to outgun him, outman him. I want to try to at least take him off his game a little bit." So we it was one of these really long conference rooms. It was like 40-foot long table, and I had 20 feet of it was nothing but guys in suits that looked like really powerful agents. Really were interns and accountants and people that had nothing to do with the business. Henry walks in, and he's all of about 5'5", and he walks in this room and he sees all of these agents sitting on both sides of me. He sits down right in front of me. We start talking. It's all niceties. Everybody introduces himself, and Henry says, last time I was in CAA, I was here negotiating the George Foreman grill, or something along those lines. And the whole room busted out laughing. Henry got pissed off, got up and left. And I had to go meet him in an Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills down the street because I embarrassed him so bad. It was funny to me, Conrad. I can tell you're not chuckling. So let's move on.
No, I like it. I'm just sort of shocked at what a fucking dickhead you are. I mean, we're going to get along great.
You have no idea.
All right, let's get back to the precinct where Goldberg is still handcuffed.
I was trying to get you off of that. Is what I was trying to do. I was hoping you would have forgotten all about it by now.
No, I mean, you did have me in a trance there, but I woke up. I thought we were doing the JJ Dillon podcast for a minute, but I'm still here.
You're a dick.
An officer explains that Liz has claimed that he's stalking her at these various locations, that he's at the same arenas as her, and he's at the same hotels as her, and he's even at the same gym as her. And of course, Goldberg says, I'm at the same arena because we're both at work. I'm at the same hotel because the company books us all together. And I'm at the gym. I'm always at the gym she's at because she comes to a gym I own. So because I own it, I'm there. Now keep in mind, WCW's promised the biggest possible main event with a rematch of their biggest show of the year, Nash and Goldberg. And now it's seemingly off. Okerlund, meanwhile, interviews Kevin Nash, who says as far as he's concerned, at Starrcade, Goldberg got screwed, and Nash calls Liz's charges, quote unquote, trumped up. He said he knows that Hogan's behind it, and he asked that the president of WCW, Ric Flair, allow Hogan to get in the ring with him tonight. He knows that Hogan, despite his retirement, is still under contract, and Nate has had 8 days to review the contract, so he knows he can make it happen. Flair walks out and agrees, with the understanding that after he beats Hogan, he's got to take on Goldberg tonight in the main event. And they replay this Nash Goldberg video package. So we've got our matches set. We're going to have Hogan and Nash, and then we're going to have Nash and Goldberg. We see another detective ask Liz to repeat the details of the incident, and she protests, I'm the victim here. Do you understand that? Now, I've always been curious about the decision to go with Liz here because Liz has been familiar with wrestling fans at this point for more than 15 years. And in all that time, we never really saw her talk or act as much as we did on this night. Was she nervous about doing it? Who had confidence she could pull it off? Why was Liz the right lady for this role?
I had 100% confidence in Liz. And you're right. I did look at this episode prior to the show, and I was so impressed with her performance. If you compare her, forget about whether you like the storyline or whatever, if you just look at the performance and judge it by itself, she did a phenomenal job. She was so believable, and she was acting. That's not just, a bullet point promo in the ring. When I see you next week, I'm going to kick your ass right here on Nitro, and I'm going to take your belt. That's easy shit to do. But to be able to tell a story and to do it and bring emotion and appear that you're really troubled by all of this and you're in on the con, I thought she did a phenomenal job, number one. Number two, I had 1,000% of confidence in her because we had done a couple things with Liz prior to this. Because I had never really seen her do anything from a speaking, role point of view. And prior to this, we had done a couple things with her and Randy, some vignettes, and I saw her perform in those. And I knew that if we could just get her a little bit comfortable, and we gave her more and more and more, as time went on. But I had 1,000% confidence in her. And I will say, after seeing that scene, tonight, getting ready for the show, I thought she did a phenomenal job.
Okerlund, of course, introduces Hulk Hogan, and he's going to be out for a promo, and he calls Hogan the most popular wrestler of all time, but the fans are booing him here, and he's supposed to be here to announce his retirement and his running mate for the presidency. That's right. Instead, he calls Goldberg a sexual deviant and said that Goldberg's actions make him sick to his stomach. And then he talks about Nash and says that Nash has been huffing and puffing and he owes the fans one last retirement match. And after he beats Nash and retires with the world title, he says, "You can call me Hollywood, the big bad wolf." And he refers to Nash as a spoon in this promo too. I've always wanted to talk about this, and I'm sure it's going to be a theme through our shows. I have forever admitted that I am a wrestling fan because of Hulk Hogan. I think he was the best babyface ever. I think he was the best heel ever. But man, he sure does get a lot of criticism. And I think a lot of it is with cause for always finding himself in an advantageous position politically. Is that the case in him inserting himself into this night? Was the decision influenced at all, do you think, by the NBC gig? Was it Nash's idea to get the belt to Hogan? What sort of led to, okay, we're getting it back to Hogan? You sort of laid out that we knew we were going to get the belt to Hogan, but we didn't say really why.
No, we did say why. You just didn't pick up on it. We wanted to bring the original NWO back together again. If you remember, if you go back and look at the shows preceding this for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, there was heat between the Wolf Pack, the red and black,
right,
and the black and white Hollywood Hogan NWO. This was an attempt to bring the original NWO back together again so we could set up the NWO versus WCW Nitro Thunder feud. That was the purpose for bringing the Hogan back together again with Nash and with Scott Hall, using Elizabeth. All of that was a part of that plan creatively.
I guess my question, and I did a poor job framing it there for certain, was
Conrad won, Eric won.
Was that Hogan's pitch, or is that does Hogan say, "Brother, we just need to do what we did back in '96, man. We lit the territory on fire"?
Yeah, that's so. I'm going to refrain from describing how I feel about that. That is so typical that's such typical thinking for people who weren't there, who just want to be negative, who don't like Hulk Hogan, and everything they see that may not make sense to them, or even if it makes sense, they just don't like it. They're going to put it on Hogan's politics. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. It didn't have anything to do with the NBC deal. That's a figment of some idiot's imagination that's trying to make themselves sound smarter than they really are, or at least just to have a conversation about something they really don't know anything about and weren't part of, but it had nothing to do with it. People are connecting dots that don't exist. It's bizarre to me.
So it was Nash's idea to just take the belt off him and put it on Hogan. Hogan wasn't involved. He's sitting at home thinking about who he wants his vice president to be. When you guys ring him up and say, "We need you at TV," you're going to beat Nash for the title.
It doesn't work that way. We were all involved in the creative. I was involved in the creative. Kevin Sullivan was involved in the creative. There were a team of people, just like there are right now in WWE.
Sure.
There was a bunch of people involved in creative. I had the final say, even though Kevin was probably the driving force and probably tried to harness as much of the creative as we possibly could so that we could all sit down when it got close to being finalized to present to me. But at the end of the day, it was my decision. And it was still my direction in terms of let's bring the NWO back together again, because the overarching theme needed to be NWO takes Nitro, WCW and Ric Flair take Thunder. That was the mission, and that was the creative that everybody, not just me, not just Kevin, not Hulk for politics, had nothing to do with NBC. That's just a bunch of marks creating dots that don't fucking exist to make themselves sound smart.
Okay, dope. All right, let's talk about one of the most famous moments.
Stir this shit up, Conrad. You wanted to get me going.
No, you did. Listen, every now and again, you totally redeem yourself and remind people they're not indeed listening to JJ. So I know we're up past your bedtime, but we'll try to power through here. This takes us to one of the most infamous moments in the history of the Monday Night Wars. And a lot of people argue maybe the turning point. Tony says, "Fans, as Hollywood Hogan walks away and you look at this 40,000 plus on hand, if you're even thinking about changing the channel to our competition, fans do not, because we understand that Mick Foley, who wrestled here once as Cactus Jack, is going to win their world title." That's going to put some butts in the seats. And as soon as Tony said that, about 600,000 people changed the channel just so they could see the title change. Now, Tony says in years since you fed him the line, obviously hindsight's 2020, but can you defend this?
Nope.
Okay.
I did it. It was my judgment, and I'm not trying to defend it. I'll explain it.
Sure.
But in the explanation, I'm not trying to defend it. I want to make that really clear.
I get it.
My modus operandi at that time, or prior to that, I should say, what got Nitro on the map, what got us to the point where we were beating WWE, and we'd gone from where we were to where we started to what we had become in 97 and 98, was the fact that I did stupid shit like that, from giving away finishes to jump starting the show a couple minutes early, just doing things that people never expected me to do, that they would talk about the next day. Like, oh my God, you believe he did that? That tactic worked more often than it didn't. Unfortunately, this time it really didn't in a big way. But that was the rationale behind it. But obviously it didn't work, and I can't defend it. It was a poor choice.
So you regret that one?
I don't regret anything, man. It's so easy to look back and say, oh, if I would have done this or if I would have done that. But again, that's hindsight.
Right.
None of us have that when we're in the middle of doing it. The people that criticize this kind of stuff, and I get it, it's okay. We're making money right now. We're having fun, looking back and critiquing and you busting my balls. And I'm up for it. I'm up for the challenge. I enjoy it too. But for me, and I know I say this a lot, context is king. If you're in the middle of that fight, you're in the middle of that war, you're going to make choices. You're going to make decisions creatively and business-wise. And anybody that's ever said, I've never made a bad creative choice or I've never made a bad tactical choice has never been paid to do it for a living. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. And this was a perfect example. But I never regret making mistakes like this. I learned from it. And by the way, I see Mick Foley on a regular basis, and I do some things in the ring with Mick, at independent shows. And every time I do, he uses that as the good guy, bad guy premise for him and I. Every time I see him, he tells that story over and over again. So if nothing else, I've given a gift that Mick Foley will cherish for the rest of his frickin' life.
Well, Mick was pretty upset when he heard Tony say it. He thought they were friends, and it upset him to the point that he even called Tony and said that it sickened him to hear him say that. And when they finally did talk, Tony blamed you. Did you ever have a conversation with Tony about that call with Mick? I mean, I know in years since you've talked to Mick, but what was your conversation like with Tony after he said, so Foley called?
I wasn't hot.
Sure.
I can remember. Tony would have a better recollection of it than I would, because to me it wasn't a big deal. To me, It was just business, just like giving away the finishes and jump starting the shows. It just didn't register on my emotional scale in one way, shape, or form. And I didn't consider Mick. I had worked with Mick in WCW. I knew Mick. Mick decided to leave WCW because I didn't want him to do all the crazy shit that Mick wanted to do to get himself over. So when Mick left WCW, and I didn't want him to go, I just didn't want him throwing himself off freaking balconies either because of the liability involved. Seriously, it's laughable in a way, but that's what he was into. He felt like in order to get his character over, he had to do the most bizarre shit anybody had ever seen. And, he had lost an ear in the ring, for crying out loud. He'd done some damage to himself, and I was legitimately concerned. But once he made the move to WWE, it's not like I had any kind of relationship with him. So, yeah, I heard about it. I knew it. I found out later. It upset Nick. And knowing Mick now, like I do, I really can understand why it upset him, because he's a very sensitive guy. Especially if, he thought it was Tony's idea. I could really understand it, knowing Mick more now than I did then. But I wasn't mad at Tony.
After Scott Steiner and Buff Bagwell do a promo, brings Conan out. Eventually Conan gets a win by DQ. And Shivani again reiterates that Mick Foley is going to win the WWF title on a pre-taped show. And he acts disgusted that somebody like Foley would hold a world title. And it almost feels like, especially when I watched it back this week, you're almost begging your audience to go watch Raw. I mean, you've sort of promised you're going to deliver Goldberg Nash, and now you're saying, hey, that's not happening because he's in custody. However, there is a title change on the other channel. It feels like this idea in hindsight really sucked a dick.
Yep.
I love that you just own it. That's my favorite thing. You know, what people asked the entire time we've been promoting this show, man, do you think you guys are going to be able to do this? And all I could think about was the very first time we did something like this on Flair's podcast, Woo Nation. And you were my favorite guest because you let me pick your brain for 2 hours and I'd give you this shit. And you just say, yeah, that sucked. Wish I had that one over again. So I'm having fun with this. At least you'll roll with the punches with me.
I may need to drink a fifth of whiskey when it's over, but I'm happy to roll with the punches with you now.
So back at the police station, Liz is changing her story multiple times. And finally, after being threatened with perjury, she admits she made everything up. This is directly from the book, Death of WCW. So the race was on. Could Goldberg make it to the Georgia Dome in time for his main event? The unintentional comedy here was that earlier in the show, it had been revealed that the police station was directly across the street from the arena. Goldberg was somehow unable to get back in time, even though he had 30 minutes to walk several dozen feet. Maybe the crosswalk light was broken. Buffer introduces both of the guys here, and this is quite the intro, man. Huge, tremendous pyro display, long, detailed intros by Buffer. Hogan's in street clothes, and Kevin Nash sort of mocks him by tearing the shirt off like Hogan used to. I guess we should set the stage. Hogan doesn't come out alone. He comes out with Scott Steiner, and then Kevin Nash comes out alone. Incredible pyro display. And he sort of throws his arms back to the entrance ramp, and we see Scott Hall is back. And this time he's wearing a Wolfpack t-shirt instead of the black and white that we'd been accustomed to. And Hogan in the ring is shocked by this. And then the bell rang. About a minute into the match, Tony Schiavone starts yelling, "This is what World Championship Wrestling is all about." This is directly from the book. Truer words have perhaps never been spoken. Hogan touched Nash in the chest with one finger, and Nash took this enormous bump like he'd been hit with a cannonball. On the bright side, it's probably the biggest bump Nash would take all year. Hogan covered him and won the belt. Afterwards, Hogan and Nash hugged, revealing that it had been a setup all along. Goldberg finally arrived and laid waste to everyone in the ring until being attacked by his newest foe, the old, immobile, washed-up Lex Luger. Fans had paid a record $930,735 to see this show, and they were outraged by what transpired, and that would be a strong understatement. Wow. That's the end. Of course, they're going to handcuff Goldberg to the ropes. Hall's going to zap him. They're going to spray paint him. They go off the air, and Raw does a 5.5. Nitro does a 5. A taped Raw beat a live world title change at the Georgia Dome. And Nash has come out and said that it's one of those things that got everybody. He says the Smarks hated it because most every one of them were just bending over because I told them, no, the dollar bill's a little further. And then I stuck my whole foot up their ass and took their balls in with it. And he says this was really done just to set up the new NWO, set up a new line of heels for Goldberg to run through, and eventually have Goldberg regain the world title. But of course, none of that happened because Goldberg messed around and got himself hurt. Your turn, Eric.
Talk about me going J.J. Dillon, for crying out loud. I almost had to have my wife bring me breakfast. I didn't know when you were going to end that. You covered a lot of ground. I'm trying to remember it all. I'm going to have to start taking notes when we go through this. First of all, when I look back at that, and look, I knew it's a hot topic. Figure Poke of Doom is almost, a running joke when you talk to wrestling fans. But if you look at that show and you forget all the urban narrative and all of the supposed facts that everybody's using surrounding that and using this show to predict, was the beginning of the end for WCW, which it had nothing to do with that, why WCW came to an end. Nothing at all to do, really. But let's just break down the scene as Brian Alvarez laid it out and you repeated in so much detail. Number one, it was, as I've said now a couple times on the show, that entire creative was designed to bring the NWO back together again and to fuck or get heat on Bill Goldberg, to fire him back up again so he had somebody to chase. Because since the beginning of freaking time, that has been the most reliable formula. The babyface who's gotten heat on him chasing the heels. Kind of always works for the most part. Now, if you look at that show like I did, thanks to you, when was the last time Brian Alvarez or you or anybody else saw as much heat from the audience when we swerved them and they realized that Hulk and Hall and Nash were all in on it? There was garbage filling that ring. And I know the really smart marks out there were going to go, oh, yeah, but that's go home heat. Well, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. None of them know the difference between go home heat, or very few of them, and real heat. That was real heat. At first, they were shocked because we fooled them. We swerved them. That angle was executed very, very well. From Liz, the setup, including the bad acting by Bill in the front where he got arrested, all of that, I thought, for the most part, was executed very, very well. Now, the little shot in the dig about, well, Bill, we said early on that the police department was right across the street from the arena. But if you go back and look at that scene, guess what? We put him in a cop car and drove him away. So we established that there was some distance between the police department and the building. Otherwise, they would have walked him to the police department, and then that bitch or that nitpicking shit probably would make sense to me. But it doesn't. He had to get back to the arena. We established with a shot intentionally that he had to be placed in a police car and driven to that location. So I don't think anybody watching it that didn't have the keen creative sense and intuitive directorial skill of a Brian Alvarez really shit on that. I think that's just another opportunity for somebody to sound smarter than they are. Overall, I thought that angle was executed very well from an in-ring perspective. Overall, from a creative point of view, it took us where we needed to be. And people can laugh about it. They can make fun of it. They can shoot holes in it, whatever they want to do. If I had to do that whole thing all over again.
Oh, don't say this. Don't say this.
Don't say what?
Are you about to say you would fucking do this over again the same way?
Well, yeah, I would. Yes, I would.
Oh, man. Thought you were a smart guy.
I am a smart guy. But if you were in that situation, if you were faced with the same things that we were faced with, if you had the same creative choices that we had available to us, and you had the same mandate that we had creatively and business-wise, I'd like to see what somebody else would have come up with. Look, television, Nitro were not pay-per-views. It wasn't. Television was used as a chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, pay it off in chapter 4. This was the very first show of the year. This is the very first show coming out of a Starrcade. Second, it was chapter 2 in a 4-chapter book. It wasn't designed to be a big blow-off and to send everybody home happy like you would at a pay-per-view. That wasn't what it was for.
Do you think that this hurt the credibility of the title?
Probably.
There's other instances we're going to get to through the course of these shows that, bring that credibility into question. But to me, this is the first time it's like, oh, nobody cares about this fucking thing at all.
That's not true. The title, and look, here's where, wannabe smart guys, wannabe bookers, wannabe experts can talk about the title being. How many times have we heard that? How many times have we seen it in WWE? How many times have we seen it in WCW? The title gets hurt when guys walk to the ring dragging the title on the floor. How many times have we seen that? The title gets hurt any number of ways that we've seen a multitude of times in WWE and WCW. The title gets hurt when you have too many of the damn things. Christ, you need a computer and an assistant to keep track of the number of titles right now in WWE. There's always something that we can point to that says, oh, that devalued the title, because that makes you sound really smart, like you know something about the business and have an intuition that the average person doesn't have. But I got to tell you, every time somebody says something like that, you can build a story and create a situation where the title means everything. The title means everything based on the story and the stakes and the investment in the characters you put into it. That's what makes a title.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to be Jim Cornette on you, but wouldn't it have made more sense in terms of quote unquote protecting the business, and you still would have gotten your angle across if Nash just would have laid down for Hogan, much like Jarrett did at Bash at the Beach?
That sucked too.
Well, no, I agree it sucked, but here's what I'm saying. When he touches him with the finger and he sells it like he died, is that not making a mockery of fucking professional wrestling?
No, he's making a mockery of the audience. That's what that scene was. That's where guys like whoever, Cornette, you name them. If that made a mockery of the business, I want to talk to the guy with a fucking tennis racket running around throwing baby dust in people's face. Tell me about mocking the business.
Oh,
I mean, how believable is that shit?
Fuck.
Yeah. Come on, brother. I don't
know what to say to that. I didn't expect that. You got me speechless here. Here's my thing. I don't understand how you can really defend Nash taking a big bump like this, not sort of insulting the intelligence of the audience. I know you're saying he's doing it to get heat with them and to mock the audience. I get that. But isn't that sort of like saying, can you guys really believe this silly shit? Look at this. I'm flopping around from a fucking, I mean, I guess let me fast forward. Let me switch gears here. Where are you with the dick flip?
With the what?
Joey Ryan does the dick flip on the indies. You're familiar with this.
Yeah, I am. I thought we were talking about Nitro. It's January 4th, 1999. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You were doing a different kind of dick flip back then, but I'm talking about Joey Ryan, present day, does a dick flip. Are you for it?
It's not my cup of tea. See, but I understand. But here's the difference. I understand it. It's a comedy spot on an indie show. By the way, I wasn't for Katie Vick either. There's a lot of things that we see in wrestling that are designed to get a laugh or not to be taken seriously. You know, Doink the Clown wasn't necessarily one of my most, memorable protect the business moments either. There's so many things. It's so easy to pick on one thing that you want to use to justify a perspective that you want everybody to think, strengthens their perception of you as a knowledgeable person. You can pick a million things. I did Monday Night Raw. I did a watch along on Monday Night Raw last week on twitch.tv/83 weeks. And I saw a lot of shit there that didn't make any sense, that didn't protect the business.
Isn't that sort of a cop out though, to be like, yeah, but there's a lot of bad stuff. This is just another one, but I'm going to defend it. Well, why not make good shit? What's wrong with arguing for good shit instead of defending bad shit?
There's nothing wrong with that, but I just don't agree, despite the urban narrative 20 years later, that story and the execution of it within the context of what we were trying to achieve. And by the way, the heat that it created, the real heat that it created for the NWO was as horrible as everybody likes to think it is.
Well, let me ask this. There's an old Dusty Rhodes phrase that I've heard. Where was the money? Where was the money in this? Business didn't go up, business went down, and yet you still defend it.
Yeah, I will. Because the reason that business didn't go up had nothing to do with this storyline, despite the fact that that's what guys like Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer and everybody else that you get your information from thought at the time. The reason that business didn't go up is because Time Warner, AOL executives, Time Warner primarily at that time, wanted a family-friendly, PG-rated show. While we were watching, people giving birth to hands and all, Stone Cold Steve Austin flipping people off, chugging the beer in a ring, doing all of the adult, edgy shit that we used to do, they were turning up the gas on that content that appealed to the audience that we used to have, while we were trying to be sanitized for television. That's the reason WCW went down the tubes, not because of this freaking angle. That's so juvenile. Honestly, it really is. Still pisses me off. Can you tell?
Well, I mean, business went down because some dumbass told 600,000 people to change the channel because he was so caught up in poking the bear and beating the other guy and sort of poking fun at what shortcomings their program had. He was focused on that instead of the inconsistent bullshit he was putting on the screen here. That's my opinion. And it's actually not my opinion. It's a fact. 600,000 people changed the fucking channel because you swerved them by saying, we're going to give you Goldberg and Nash. No, fuck that. We're not doing that. But hey, there's a title change on the other channel and everybody left. And you're like, it was fine. Business was bad because we couldn't have old ladies give birth to a hand, which hadn't even happened here yet. It happened in 2000.
Well, Mike Tyson had happened, everything. You know what I'm talking about. You can pick it apart, and you're right. But I did say earlier on, when you asked me to defend that shit, as far as the Mick Foley and, hey, there's something going on over there, there's going to be a title change, bad. I told you, I can't defend it. It was a choice. It was a tactic that had worked previously. It didn't work this time. My bad. Not trying to defend that.
Well,
you're putting words in my mouth.
Let's talk about the silly shit that Nash tries to use as an excuse. And for the record, Nash is the most charming, intellectual dude in the history of wrestling who can convince you that anything's a good idea. So I get why he was in this spot and how everybody put him there. I mean, Nash is a hell of a salesman. I'm co-signing. However, he says, well, the idea was we're going to make Goldberg run through all of us, but that didn't happen because he hurt himself. Well, that fucking injury happened in December of this year. So that narrative is off base. Hulk Hogan even goes back and says, despite what you're saying here, this angle, the Fingerpoke of doom, this is the beginning of the demise. I mean,
you know why Hulk says that? Because that's the narrative. And that's kind of the pattern there. It's really easy to jump on that bandwagon. So, man, that was the beginning of the end. I had nothing to do with that. That wasn't me, man. They wanted me to do that. It's the Kevin Sullivan disease. It's really easy when you're trying to make yourself look good, or when you want other people to take the heat for something, to distance yourself from it. I can't justify what he did, what Hulk did or didn't say, or what Kevin did or didn't say, because I wasn't there. I didn't hear it. All I'm telling you is nobody that was in that ring on that particular night said, Eric, I don't think this is a good idea.
That's my next question. When everybody comes back through the curtain, is everybody all high fives? Everybody thinks, hey man, we did it. This was great.
I believe they did because of the heat that it got. That's the thing. You can break this thing down. You could talk about it with 20/20 hindsight, 20 years later, and you could be a brilliant, commentator on this particular subject 20 years later. But if you go back and you look at that scene and you put yourself in that moment and you look at the heat that NWO got, Scott, Hulk, Kevin, when they had him handcuffed to the ring and I was doing the play-by-play and the sound effects of the spray paint can and the electric, cattle prod and all of that, that ring was filling up with garbage. That was real heat, regardless of what, wannabe writers say. That was real heat. And anytime you can get real heat, which is so rare, I'd like anybody to go back in the last 15 years and give me an example of real heat that we've seen. You haven't. You see Pavlov's dog heat. You see heat that, that was what was supposed to happen. That was interesting. The wrestling was really good. And that's part of a story. But when was the last time you saw as much heat in the last 15 years as you saw in the last 60 seconds of that match?
Death of WCW here again. Nitro had settled into a pattern of finishing a point or so behind Raw every week. As you can imagine, Bischoff was not pleased and decided that changes needed to be made and fast. Unfortunately, these changes had nothing to do with fixing the atrocious shows the company was presenting. No, a completely different plan was in the works. The time was right, he believed, to beat Goldberg. Actually, that had been the plan for a long time. Hogan would drop the strap to Goldberg at the Georgia Dome, and then he'd win it back at Starrcade. But somewhere along the way, there was a change in plans. Perhaps you're thinking the change in plans was for Hogan not to beat Goldberg after all. Perhaps you'd be thinking that Goldberg was such a good ratings draw, a house show draw, and merchandise seller that it would have been foolish to take the belt from him and put it back on Hogan, whose drawing power had waned over the past several months. But you'd be wrong. The change of plans was to have Goldberg drop the title to a horrible wrestler not named Hogan, but to a horrible wrestler named Kevin Nash. Nash had just been named the head booker for the promotion, and once this happened, everything backstage went into disarray. It went into disarray for fake reasons, however, not real reasons. Confused? So he runs through the rest of the narrative here that we've already presented, but he does address the rumor and innuendo, and that's what I wanted to get to here, that apparently there was a gentleman's agreement of sorts that when Hogan dropped the belt to Goldberg at Georgia Dome, they're going to have a rematch where Hogan gets the win back at Starrcade. Was that the original plan?
Does he say how he knows that? Where did he get where does that information come from?
Thin air.
I'll say.
So that was never discussed.
No.
Okay.
Bullshit.
Here's what he writes. Basically, Nash, Hogan, and Bischoff came up with a scenario to work all the boys. No, not to work the fans in an effort to make money, but to work the boys in, well, an effort to make them not so miserable. You see, pretty much everyone on the undercard hated Hogan. They saw a guy who was past his prime and needed to step aside to make room for the new stars. Nash, however, was such a great politician that everyone liked him. In fact, no matter what he did, you'd be hard pressed to find a person backstage who didn't think he was a really cool guy. So the plan was to give Nash the booking position, and Hogan, quote unquote, outraged with his loss of power, would pretend to quit. He'd disappear for a while. Nash would make everyone happy and morale would improve. Of course, the long-term plan was to eventually bring Hogan back and put the belt on him again. Also, Hogan needed time off to film Muppets in Space. Yes, we're serious. So chat me up here. I've always wanted to sort of pin you down on this. Hogan's getting paid to sit at home here and retire, quote unquote, and plan his presidency. Was there some sort of understanding that got a little heat backstage, brother? Need to go away for a while. Let's let Nash turn the morale around.
Was that Randy Savage or was that Hulk?
I don't know. That's Bruce's deal.
I know Bruce could do them, right? I can't. I can't do good impersonations. Again, you covered a lot of ground there. Hulk's contract was structured in such a way that he was on. I remember the first one. I don't remember the subsequent ones. Originally, he was to do 4 pay-per-views a year, and he got less than Brock money to do them, substantially less than Brock money. His deal was structured very similar to the way Brock's is structured right now. So he was scheduled for a certain number of pay-per-views a year, initially 4, it might have gone up to 6 by the time we're talking about here. And then he would be paid a much lesser amount of money to do a certain amount of TVs leading up to that pay-per-view that he was scheduled to be on. That was the structure of his deal. So when he went home for any period of time, or when he was off television for any period of time, he was not getting paid to sit at home. He was getting paid according to the way his deal was structured, just like Brock Lesnar is right now. Sweet deal. Not saying it's not. But the idea that, oh, just go home or go make a movie and we'll pay you anyway is just more, urban narrative bullshit. That's number one. Number two, in your dissertation, we weren't trying to swerve the boys or work the boys. Again, that's somebody observing the fact that Hulk Hogan's gone and coming up, smoking a joint and coming up with their own nonsense and trying to make themselves smart by writing it. It's not true. I needed Kevin. I needed to take a little time away from creative. I need somebody to grab that ball who I had confidence in. I didn't have the confidence in Kevin Sullivan to come up with the type of stories that I needed at the top of the card. I just didn't. I needed somebody else. Kevin was there. Kevin was willing to do it. I've already covered that. There was no working the boys involved in it. That's just more, fictional nonsense.
Let's finish out this bit from the book. So Nash got the book, and as most bookers do, he began to write storylines designed to make himself the center of attention. His main idea was to set up his big win over Goldberg for the belt at Starrcade. Step one was to put himself in a 3-ring #1 contender battle royal at World War III. A show that ended up better than expected, seeing as it was expected to be the worst ever. Step 2 was to book himself as a man who then ends the win streaks. Coincidentally, there was another man on Nitro who'd been on a win streak lately and was starting to get over. His name was Rath. Nash beat him in 4 minutes and 45 seconds the next night, and that was the end of him getting over. When did you think, and I can't wait for you to tap dance around this shit, when did you realize that Nash had hurt the company? Was there sort of what alcoholics would call a moment of clarity of, oh fuck, we're in trouble?
There were a lot of those moments of clarity, but it had nothing to do with Kevin Nash. It's Brian Alvarez's perspective. It's not mine. Kevin Nash did the best Kevin Nash could do. I went along with Kevin Nash. Put it on me. Don't put it on Kevin. Kevin might have been the booker, but he didn't have the final say. I did. To me, that story with Kevin and Bill and Hulk leading up to January 4th, which would have taken us into the plan of NWO Nitro, WCW Thunder. To me, that plan made the most sense, and Kevin was the best guy because he was believable. We turned Bill into a monster. Who else was going to beat him? And by the way, despite Alvarez's, amazing perspective, Rath couldn't string a sentence together. He couldn't cut a promo. It wasn't believable. Just because a guy can have a good match doesn't mean a guy is a big star. And we've seen that over and over and over.
Wait a minute. You're paying Bill Goldberg $5 million here, and he can't deliver 7 sentences, and you're going to shit on Rath? What's the difference between Goldberg and Rath except one you fucking paid $5 million to?
Big difference. Bill could cut a promo in the ring. He wasn't good outside of the ring. He wasn't good in a scene like we gave him because he didn't have that much experience.
Okay.
Rath couldn't cut a promo in the ring.
What's your favorite Bill Goldberg promo?
I don't remember.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Everybody who says, oh, he was a good promo, fucking give me one.
I'll go back with you. One of these days we'll go back on twitch.tv/83 weeks. So we'll look at all Bill's promos, and together we'll pick our favorite.
Yeah.
I remember Bill's promos. Bill's character didn't require a promo. Bill was a believable guy. But it had not. You can laugh your ass off if you want. If you can't tell me that you could compare Rath and his character to Bill Goldberg, you can't. Even if neither one of them were required to string a sentence together. They were two different characters. One was believable and intense, and the other was a big guy.
One was booked to be believable and intense, and the other one was not.
Says the man that's never had to book a show.
What are you booking these days, buddy? Let's move on. Mike Mooneyham wrote in the January 10th Charleston Post and Courier regarding the Georgia Dome Nitro. Most of those 39,000 fans were there to watch hometown favorites Goldberg and Nash in a world title rematch, and by not delivering that bout in favor of Hogan's attempt to put himself over once again. The Torch had this to say: on the positive side for WCW, they clearly have a game plan and a set of leaders who are steering the ship. On the negative side, Hogan has returned to the top position at a time when it seems that fans would like to see anyone other than him in that slot. Let's go to the end of his write-up here. He says, the idea of Nash handing Hogan the title had been rumored for a couple of months. That the angle played out that way shows that Nash and Hogan indeed chose to unite rather than fight behind the scenes. That may lead to more stability behind the scenes, or it could mean Hogan has no opposing power base to keep him in check. Is this idea of let's sort of collaborate on this creative, is that really an effort to try to just create peace in the back where maybe there had been, I don't know, some sort of an upheaval? We've heard through the dirt sheets again that Hogan and Nash at times had a bit of a power struggle and you were sort of caught in the middle. Was this some sort of way to maybe get everybody back on the right, line of thinking?
No,
okay.
It wasn't. It look, again, it so often is the case with a lot of this stuff. There's a kernel of truth to a lot of it.
Right.
Even the Alvarez stuff, as I pointed out, throughout this podcast, there's always a kernel of truth in there somewhere. And then it gets, it gets built upon and built upon and built upon. Here's the truth. Yeah, there was often issues between Hogan and Nash. I can tell you stories, not on this podcast because I don't want to go J.J. Dillon on you, but I can tell you a lot of great stories or interesting stories about extremely tense moments that took place between Scott Hall and Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash and myself in the middle. Some of them that I thought were going to get violent, as a matter of fact. So there were those moments, but they had nothing to do with this moment and this strategy and this creative. So again, it's somebody taking a kernel of truth from something that may have happened 6 months ago and all of a sudden connecting it to a dot that they see over here and trying to convince everybody they got a three-dimensional picture because they have that much vision. It wasn't. At that time, we were all up against the wall. We knew that there were changes being inflicted upon us creatively. We had things we could do that we couldn't do. There were things we couldn't do that we used to be able to do before. We couldn't call each other stupid. In a promo, I couldn't say, Conrad, I'm going to kick your stupid ass. Because I couldn't say that. If we were working together in WCW. Because a lady by the name of Terry Tingle would have come down on me and said, you can't use a term like stupid. You can't use a term. By the way, that's another reason why the whole rape thing, and that story about it originally being a rape scene would have never happened. Turner would have never let that happen. They were politically correct before it was correct to be politically correct at that time.
Well, let's let everybody know that next week we're going to be arguing for a long time about Bret Hart and WCW and how Eric really fucked that up from the word go. And I can't wait to do that. And the following week, we've got Bash at the Beach 2000. So tune in next week. We're going to give you a poll topic for what we're doing the week after that. But your next 2 weeks, they're going to be hopping, man. Bret Hart and WCW, Bash at the Beach 2000. We invite you to ask your questions. You can do that on Facebook or Twitter. If you'd like to ask on Facebook, it's facebook.com/83 weeks. We're looking for your Bret Hart questions, and you can post those also on Twitter at 83 weeks. We've got a handful of questions here. We're going to rapid fire them, and we got these directly from Facebook and Twitter. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Chris wants to know, how did you get the spray paint off of everything all the time?
I don't know. I didn't do it. Somebody backstage did. I'm guessing there was something like paint thinner or something.
Evan Worlds wants to know, how did Hogan feel about this finish, brother?
He went along with it. So I guarantee if he wouldn't have liked it, he wouldn't have gone along with it.
Did Hogan ever say, I can't wait for you to deny this too, that doesn't work for me, brother?
Hell no. He said it a lot.
There we go.
And usually when he said it, he kind of leaned forward. He'd stick that gigantic chin of his out, and he'd start stroking that Fu Manchu. He'd stroke it about 3 or 4 times. He looked like that statue of the thinker, the guy that sits on a rock with his forehead on his fist. He'd kind of get that pose to him, and he'd stroke that Fu Manchu. So, doesn't work for me, brother. It would either be that or, can't make that one. Which means didn't want to do a shot, whether it was a house show or a European tour or something like that. So, yeah, no, he said that a lot. I heard that often.
Jude wants to know, who was the agent for the Fingerpoke of Doom match?
Terry Taylor.
I really hope that's true. Edward wants to know,
why? I don't know if it is or not, but I'm going to put it on Terry.
Why not, right? Why do the stunt on the same night as Rock Mankind for the WWE title?
Because I didn't have my 2020 hindsight goggles on. I left them at home. If I would have brought them with me, I wouldn't have done it.
Nishad wants to know, was this done to infuriate WCW fans or get a good laugh at the competition?
Was what done? I'm sorry.
The Fingerpoke of Doom.
It was done to get heat. It was done. Look what we did. Again, going back to what happened. If you look at the entire show, what happened? Ric Flair came in his very first night, president of the company. He got that by defeating me, right? Put me in my spot. He gets this big entrance. His family's there. He's firmly in control. He's now put the 4 Horsemen in a great position. NWO and everything that Ric Flair hated and despised, including me and the NWO, is now on the bottom, and they've got to work their way up. And what did we do by the end of the show? We fucked over Goldberg. We fucked over Ric Flair in front of his family, and we got control back by grabbing the title. I'm sorry. I'm still digging the story. You may not have liked the execution, but the story still worked.
Ramon asks a great question. Why not just have Goldberg drop the belt back to Hogan?
In what way? And how would you do that?
Well, I mean, you could have had Goldberg get his rematch at Starrcade with Hogan, and you just do this sort of swerve thing with Kevin Nash at Starrcade. And instead of having Scott Hall come in with the shock stick, there's Nash, and it looks like he's gonna, do something against Hogan. And in fact, he does it to Goldberg and jackknifes him, and ta-da, Hogan's the champ.
Doesn't work for me, brother.
Lee wants to know, this is worth mentioning, was Billy Silverman smartened up beforehand?
Sure.
Chris wants to know, was Hogan's future presidential aspirations taken into account when planning the finish?
Sure.
Tom wants to know, how quick and severe was the backlash from the fans and the locker room?
From the fans and the locker room? The fans in the locker room.
Were there fans in the locker room?
No, there were no fans in the locker room. They hated us too. It wasn't, this is something that's kind of grown in disdain over the years. It wasn't as nearly bad then as it is now.
Well, Joshua Pope writes this: I was in attendance that night and had not missed the Nitro since before the NWO angle began. But when I left that night, I drove the 4 hours home and I didn't watch wrestling again for 15 years. What would you say to me, Eric Bischoff?
What was the question?
What would you say to me, Eric Bischoff?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Drew has the best question of the night. Can we all at least agree that this is the best flat back bump Nash has ever taken?
If it's not, it's got to be damn close.
Well, we're hoping that you're damn close to hitting the subscribe button, leaving us a review, going over, checking us out on Twitch. I'm not done with Bischoff. We're not done. Go to twitch.tv/83 weeks. Catch up with us there. We're going to be interactive, taking your questions. We're going to watch this with you this week. It's going to be something to see. Get all the details by following us on Twitter at 83 weeks. And we're going to have some incentives for you. If you start hitting that follow button on Twitter, we're going to try to boost those numbers there. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube too. You never know when Eric's going to drop some exclusive content over there. That's 83weeks.com. As always, you can pick up a shirt over at ericbischoff.com, and eventually Eric's going to call and thank you. And don't forget to ask a question for next week's Bret Hart and WCW discussion. I'm looking forward to that. On a scale of 1 to 10, how frustrated are you right now, Eric?
Oh, I feel good.
Oh, good. Well, I'm not done. I'm going to finish you off on twitch.tv/83 weeks. And we'll see you next Monday right here on 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff.